Hi, welcome to BCOM 4300, Managing Communications in Business. The textbook is Introduction to Leadership by Peter G. Northouse. We're at Chapter 2, Recognizing Your Traits. This draws on the oldest approach to leadership, the trait approach that we talked about in the previous chapter. As you probably noticed, a large part of this class overlaps with organizational behavior research, but our focus is on research related to the successful communication behaviors of leaders that can be improved. Because some of the research overlaps, you'll see some theories, research, or big names of researchers that you've heard about before. However, the focus here will not just be on knowledge, but your ability to draw on that research to analyze leadership scenarios and then put that research into practice. So for now, let's take a step back and focus on the earliest conception of leadership, leadership as a trait. So as we look at these study guide questions, you're going to want to be able to answer these questions. What does the trait approach focus on? What makes it different from other approaches? This is only in this lecture. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the trait approach? Also not in the book, in this lecture. And then in the book, you want to look at those 6 key traits of successful leaders and be able to identify them in examples. And they have some wonderful examples in the book, much more thorough than what I'm going to give you. I think most of us are fascinated by how these questions lead to the hot questions, the ones we care the most about, such as what traits seem to be strongly related to effective leadership in everyday life, and what are the great men and great women actually like? Do they all share some magical set of traits for leadership? Well, the trait approach has a long history. While it emerged in the early 20th century for the first time under this name, it was based on the great man theories that had been taught since ancient times. As we discussed in Chapter 1, those who endorse this theory believe that leaders are born, not made. So what does that mean? Leaders are born with special qualities that differentiate them from followers. The early great man theories focused on looking at great men in history to identify the innate qualities or characteristics of great leaders. Well, this might seem a little odd to us today because of the default assumption that great men were born great, marked somehow for greatness from birth. This was one of the first systematic attempts to study leadership. So what did early trait approach research focus on? They looked at physical and psychological features to see which ones were associated with leaders. For example, they asked, were leaders tall? You might think of the jokes about Napoleon here. Other examples might be, were great leaders old? Were they smart? Were they outgoing? This approach was challenged by Ralph Stogdill in 1948, who asserted that there wasn't a consistent set of traits between leaders and non-leaders. Note the year when he challenged this approach. Can you think of a reason why that time period might have fueled this research? As Stogdill said, a person does not become a leader by virtue of the possession of some combination of traits, but the pattern of personal characteristics of the leader must bear some relevant relationship to the characteristics, activities, and goals of the followers. So Ralph Stogdill, he analyzed a lot of trait studies and found that there wasn't clear agreement on which traits mattered. He made a list of every trait that had been studied or identified. What did he find? He found that all of them together made the list too long to be useful. If you want a definitive note on this researcher, note that Ralph Stogdill was one of the first scholars to challenge trait theory as a theory. So if there are no consistent sets of traits between leaders and non-leaders, what do we look for? Well, these days, we actually have strength-based leadership, which we're going to talk about in Chapter 6, and that's a variation of trait leadership. Other researchers have come to Stogdill's point, and they have refined it. Personality traits alone do not adequately explain leadership, said Johnson and Hackman in 2018. Personal factors were important, but they were relative to the requirements of the situation. The success of so many of these traits depend on the context and the situation. So we have this recent research where they really looked at this more closely, and you can just imagine how much more closely we're going to look at this in the future. We have leaders that everyone in the entire world, almost 8 billion people, know. These leaders make, steps every day once again, Twitter. And we all talk about their leadership choices. So you can just imagine how this field is going to open up and what we're going to see next. So we want to see, though, what's interesting and significant about Stogdill, and it's that he was also in an interesting moment in time. He reconceptualized leadership as a relationship between people in a social situation, not equality, at that time in 1948. Just on the end of World War II, with a world that has been influenced greatly by leaders and the decisions that they've made. So how does trade approach work? The trade approach is very different from other approaches because it focuses exclusively on the leader, not the followers or the situation. The leader focus makes the approach more straightforward than other approaches. It emphasizes that effective leadership hinges on a leader having a certain set of traits. The trade approach suggests that organizations will be more effective if the managers or leaders fit a trait profile. So have you taken a Myers-Briggs personality test? If you have, if you know that you're an INFP or an ENTJ, you've probably taken that test. Or have you done the Clifton Strengths Finder? What about the Enneagram test? All of these tests arose from a trait approach. Why do you like these? Why do you think leaders like these tests? They can play an interesting role in personal awareness and development. They can help leaders see and talk about strengths and weaknesses. So the traits approach, why do people like it? Well, it's intuitively appealing, and it fits with popular conceptualizations of leaders as special people. For example, think about the origin stories of special leaders in history. Many of them have amazing birth stories, and as they grow, they stand out. Here's an obvious example. The symbol of Rome for centuries has been a she-wolf suckling twin boys, Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. These twins have that special birth story, born of a Vestal virgin, the daughter of King Numitor, and, in some sources, the god Mars. King Numitor was displaced by his brother, who saw the twins as a threat and ordered them to be killed. The twins were abandoned on the bank of the river Tiber to die, and they were saved by a god and suckled by a she-wolf. As with so many of these stories, while the twins were unaware of their royal origins, their special qualities were obvious to everyone around. So, what else is appealing? The traits approach has a century of research to back it up. That gives it credibility. It conceptually highlights the leader component in the leadership process. The leadership involves leaders, followers, and situations, and it focuses on leaders. This focus on leaders allows us to have a deeper understanding of how the leader and their trait relates to the leadership process. However, the hyper-focus on the leader through the trait approach can also be a weakness to the approach. This trait approach provides benchmarks for what we should look for in a leader. Trait assessment can help people identify where to improve their leadership effectiveness. So what are some criticisms of the trait approach? There's no short list. So there's no definitive list of leadership traits. There have been a huge amount of trait studies in the past 100 years. Too many traits for us to, basically go check, 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 and be done. And there's no context. The approach doesn't consider the importance of situations. So think about that Stogdill quote, where he challenges the approach. People with a set of traits, they may excel as a leader in one situation, but not in another. And some people may have traits that help them become leaders, but not the traits that help them stay leaders. Situation influences leadership. Thus, it's tricky to identify a universal set of leadership traits. So the two previous criticisms feed into the third criticism listed that I just discussed. Now let's also think about another criticism. It's subjective. The trait approach results in a highly subjective list of the most important leadership traits that can't really be tested or studied. It is subjective because it doesn't look at followers or situations. So one author might say X trait is important and another claims Y trait is. For example, think about how some Amazon self-help books might cherry-pick certain traits to hinge leadership on. It's not outcome-focused. It fails to look at traits in relationship to leadership outcomes, so what you want to achieve. And isn't that so often how we measure whether someone's successful or not? The trait research emphasizes identifying traits, but doesn't address how traits impact group members and their work. Trait research looks at the link between traits and leadership emergence. It doesn't look at the link between traits and other outcomes, like productivity or employee satisfaction. It's not useful for training or development. It's not useful for training or development for leadership itself. So you can't train people to have these traits if you believe that they're innate. Those traits aren't easily changed. So even if you had that definitive list, how would you teach it? Traits are largely fixed psychological structures. That limits the value of teaching and leadership training. You can't coach something that's not going to change, right? So we have to ask, do traits matter? The short answer is yes, but not as much as early researchers thought. The trait approach is valuable, despite the criticism, but it doesn't provide a definitive set of traits. It does give direction about which traits are good for people who want to be leaders. So why is it valuable? It encourages reflection and discussion about people's beliefs, approaches, and behaviors. Trait assessments allow people to see if they have certain traits and then pinpoint strengths and weaknesses related to leadership. Stogdill's challenge showed the importance of viewing leaders in context, in their society, with their followers at that moment in time. Stogdill's conclusions are still true today. An individual isn't a leader just because they have a set of traits. The traits have to be relevant to the situation the leader is in. And as our text notes, leaders in one situation may not be leaders in another. Stogdill's challenge and the research that stemmed from that challenge emphasize that leadership isn't passive. Simply having some magical traits does not lead to outcomes. Leadership comes from working with other group members. Findings like Stogdill's led to behavioral and situational leadership research. So there are some new developments in trait studies. The results of studies conducted to identify traits of effective leaders have produced a very long list of important leadership traits. Each of these traits contributes to the leadership process. The important traits based on research studies conducted by several investigators include achievement, persistence, insight, initiative, self-confidence, responsibility, cooperativeness, tolerance, influence, sociability, drive, motivation, integrity, confidence. I love how there's self-confidence and then confidence, cognitive ability, task knowledge, extroversion, conscientiousness, and openness. Okay, and with advanced statistical techniques, researchers have been able to narrow down the list to 6 key traits. These are not the only traits, but ones that appear consistently, and our book covers them so well. So what are these traits? Intelligence. It's an important trait related to effective leadership. Intelligence includes having good language skills, perceptual skills, and reasoning ability. Intelligent leaders are well informed. They are aware of what is going on around them and understand the job that needs to be done. So, Northouse notes, leaders tend to have higher intelligence than non-leaders, and that's from Zaccaro's research in 2017. There is an interesting note. Leadership can be counterproductive if the leader and followers' IQs are drastically different. Simon Tin in 2017 found that the optimal IQ is just above one standard deviation. One standard deviation above the mean follower IQ. So you want to be, as the leader, a little more intelligent than your followers, but not a lot. There is a curvilinear relationship between IQ and perceived leadership. What does that mean? It's good to be smart as a leader, but if you're too smart, it impacts leadership perceptions negatively. So there's that one standard deviation above the mean is good. Any more than that, it's a negative relationship the more intelligent you get. Then we get to confidence. Confident people feel self-assured and believe that they can accomplish their goals. They feel strong and secure about their positions, move forward, and feel a sense of certainty and belief that they are doing the right thing. Confidence is a trait that has to do with feeling positive about oneself and one's ability to succeed. Confidence comes from understanding what is required of you. So think about that. You can become more confident, obviously, if you better understand what you're supposed to be doing. Awareness and understanding build confidence. Confidence can also come from having a mentor to show the way and provide constructive feedback. confidence also comes from practice. So adopting small leadership roles or doing activities related to a future role, like an internship, help you become more confident in your field. Charisma is one of the most rare of these 6 traits. It's magnetic charm and appeal, and it can have a huge effect on the leadership process. It gives the leader exceptional powers of influence, and it's not common, as I pointed out, but we all know one or more people who have charisma. Charisma can also be used by leaders in less positive ways. It enhances a leader's ability to gain people's devotion. Incorporated with charisma are leaders' strong rhetorical skills, their vision and energy, which destructive leaders use to win others over and to exploit followers for their own ends. So there are some behaviors characterizing charismatic leadership. So as an overview, you look for strong communicators. They're good at building relationships with others, and they're good impression managers. So impression management is actually a term that you will see that some amazing researchers have been looking at. And think about this time of branding. Impression management becomes even more significant. So these charismatic role models, charismatic communicators are strong role models. And they're strong role models for the values that they desire others to adopt. They show competence in leadership, so others usually trust their decisions. They articulate clear goals and strong values. They communicate high expectations for followers and show confidence in their ability to meet those expectations, and they are an inspiration to others. Determination. Determined leaders are very focused and attentive to tasks. They know where they are going and how they intend to get there. Determination is the decision to get the job done. It includes characteristics such as initiative, persistence, and drive. Staying focused on the task, clarifying the goals, articulating the vision, and encouraging others to stay the course are characteristics of determined leaders. What is the most easily acquired trait? Probably determination. Why? It just requires perseverance. So, people with determination are willing to assert themselves. They are proactive, and they have the capacity to persevere in the face of obstacles. Being determined includes showing dominance at times, especially in situations where others need direction. Isn't that interesting? So what are some characteristics of a determined leader? Staying focused on the task, clarifying the goals, articulating the vision, and encouraging others to stay the course. Now we get to sociability. Sociability refers to a leader's capacity to establish pleasant social relationships. Are you a sociable leader? If you're friendly, outgoing, courteous, tactful, and diplomatic, yes. Sociable leaders are sensitive to others' needs, and they show concern for their well-being. They have good interpersonal skills and help to create cooperative relationships within their work environments. It's possible to increase sociability. While some individuals are naturally people persons, or as you've probably had a friend say, I'm a people person, others prefer to be alone. And while you can vary in the degree to which you're outgoing, it's possible to increase sociability. Be friendly and kind and thoughtful. Talk freely with others and give them support. That goes a long way to establishing sociability. I often have introverted students who are skeptical about their own ability to adopt these behaviors. However, once they understand these behaviors as a job, as something they don't necessarily enjoy all the time, but they can learn how to do, then they excel more than the natural extroverts. Introverts also have the ability to focus and listen actively one-on-one, a key aspect of sociability, and part of being seen as kind and thoughtful, that extroverts can struggle to achieve. So what is this like in the workplace? An example of sociability would be a coworker or manager who puts people at ease, intentionally walks around the office to interact and get to know people, remembers names, is kind, listens, and feels approachable. Integrity. What is it? Integrity characterizes leaders who possess the qualities of honesty and trustworthiness. Good leaders are honest. Honesty helps people to have trust and faith in what leaders have to say and what they stand for. Honesty also enhances a leader's ability to influence others because they have confidence in and believe in their leader. Strong principles and responsibility are a key aspect of this. People who adhere to a strong set of principles and take responsibility for their actions are exhibiting integrity. There's also follow-through and transparency. Leaders with integrity inspire confidence in others because they can be trusted to do what they say they are going to do. They are loyal, dependable, and transparent. Basically, integrity makes a leader believable and worthy of our trust. Integrity demands being open with others and representing reality as fully and completely as possible. There are times when telling the complete truth can be destructive or counterproductive. The challenge for leaders is to strike a balance between being open and candid and monitoring what is appropriate to disclose in a particular situation. While it is important for leaders to be authentic, it is also essential for them to have integrity in their relationships with others. Integrity undergirds all aspects of leadership. Integrity is a central aspect of a leader's ability to influence. If people do not trust a leader, the leader's influence potential is weakened. In essence, integrity is the bedrock of who a leader is. When a leader's integrity is actively questioned by followers, his or her potential to lead deteriorates. Enron or WorldCom would be good examples of corporate scandals related to integrity. So let's take the great man approach and look at some historical figures to determine leadership traits. George Washington is considered to be the founding father of the United States of America, being the first president of the United States. His leadership was pivotal in the development of this country's government. He was truly respected by everyone, from low-ranking soldiers to feisty public officials. He was a man of great integrity, who was a good listener. Leadership in the Army was instrumental. He served as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army from 1775 to 1783. His leadership was instrumental in leading the colonies to victory over Great Britain in the Revolutionary War. He served 2 times as president. He was elected by 100% of the Electoral College as the first president of the United States, and then served 2 terms. Although he had the people's support, he chose not to serve a 3rd term. We have Winston Churchill, who was a talented, prolific writer who remained prime minister until 1945, famous for his speeches. And as you can tell, both of these people, and Mother Teresa, who's coming up, have been depicted here by the way they are remembered. They are remembered in art. They are remembered in monuments, right? So we have someone who was plain speaking and ambitious, transparent, held the course, determined, masterful use of language, had a charisma about him. We look at Mother Teresa, won the Nobel Peace Prize, served with the missions of charity, remained actively involved in work throughout her life. She is known as being simple and humble, who stayed focused on her goal, that determination. She had a strong will, and she tended to practice what she preached. Obviously, we have some leaders still living today. And this is taken from Bill Gates' own website and what he sees as his big career highlight, his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But he was a self-made man. He co-founded Microsoft in 1975. Created the foundation, is not going to leave his children billionaires, one of his decisions. He's known as a visionary, right? And he's task-oriented and diligent, has that determination, focused and aggressive, and has a unique personal style. Also with a unique personal style, also still alive, and this is taken from her website and her book club, is Oprah Winfrey. Powerful and influential, was an honors student, known for the Oprah Winfrey Show and her many roles in media. Excellent communicator, intelligent and well-read, spontaneous and expressive. Another still living great is LeBron James, professional basketball player, uses his celebrity status cautiously and supports numerous programs. LeBron James is known for his physical power, but his consistency and ambition were also notable, right? He had a strong set of principles, both resilience and charisma. So what do all of these leaders have in common? visionary, they were strong-willed, they were diligent, inspirational, purpose-driven, role models, and symbols of hope. So when we come back to the study guide questions, think about what the trait approach focuses on and what makes it different from the other approaches. What are the strengths and weaknesses? And what are those 6 key traits? Be able to identify them in examples. In the end, you should also be able to catalog your own traits. So go ahead and, complete our surveys. Make sure you take a Myers-Briggs test. Go do the Clifton Strengths Finders test, and do an Enneagram, because it's always nice to think about who you are and what your strengths are and view yourself that way. And we'll talk more about strengths in Chapter 6. Strengths are an outgrowth of the trait approach, right? And they are still so important today. Have a great day. Bye.